So the other night, my mom and I were watching the new season of Drag Race as it was airing, as is our tradition. If you're curious, we're both Team Lexi Love. But during the commercial break, she told me something that she'd been thinking about recently when it comes to musicians and the music industry. And considering it's been my personal mission to infect her brain with the stan culture boreworm, I was very interested to hear this. What she told me was that, to her, it seems like we're entering the death of the album era for mainstream musicians. She said that it doesn't make sense for some artists to be making full albums when said artists don't really have their hearts in it and they're just being forced to do so by their label. And to be honest, when it comes to certain artists, I agree with my mother. I then asked her when she's going to release the follow-up to Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Nowadays, releasing standalone singles seems to be the primary moneymaker in the streaming service, memory of a goldfish, TikTok runtime era of music making. Everybody blames for the continuation of TikTok as a feasible means of music promotion. Boo. I definitely have my issues with this change, but a specific one is that, as my mom said, it's made it so that releasing albums is becoming more of a chore for artists who don't necessarily fit the album mold. To name an obvious example, Ice Spice is an artist that made her career off of buzzy singles like Munch and Bikini Bottom, but most definitely fumbled the bag when it came to her debut album, Y2K. I don't even think her biggest supporters were happy with that album, and to me it's because Ice Spice just doesn't make sense as an album's artist. I loved her previous singles, I think she is very capable of making a fantastic song or two, but it was pretty clear that she was just going through the motions on Y2K. She got all the right features and managed to scrape together enough songs to justify an album, but it just felt forced. Her career definitely took a hit because of it, and because of other things, obviously. But I think forcing her to make an album was a bad call on her label's part. Allegedly. Tate McRae is another example of this type of artist who just doesn't really need to be making albums. I think she makes some excellent turn-your-brain-off pop music. I am a Tate trier and a Tate truther at heart. But Think Later was a gigantic mixed bag in my opinion. It had some excellent songs like the singles, Run for the Hills, Hurt My Feelings, the title track, but others were massive slogs and clearly paled in comparison to the far better tracks on the album. I don't know how this new album is gonna sound, but so far its rollout has emulated the Think Later strategy. Excellent singles with great promotion, but the deep cuts are likely gonna be paid dust. If Tate had just stuck with releasing songs like Greedy and X's as standalone singles, I think she would be a lot better received right now, Minecraft Villager accusations aside. But these are two artists that are firmly in the mainstream zeitgeist, and I don't care if you're gonna tell me that Tate McRae is a Kia, because she isn't anymore. Shut up. Whereas the idea of an album is seeming like it's going to be less and less of a necessity for these types of artists, the independent and smaller label scenes are where this type of project is truly thriving right now. Part of the reason why I think this has to do with their appreciation of a full body of work. Artists in indie scenes aren't really worried about their next TikTok hit, or where they're charting on the Hot 100 or global Spotify. So when you take all of that away, the next obvious area of focus would be the album as a work of art. And if there's any specific type of album that these musicians excel at, it's a debut album. Having this passion for storytelling and world building as an artist makes for debuts that do an excellent job of introducing them to the world through the aesthetics and theming that comprise these albums. And that's where we can get into what actually makes a good debut album. Straight off the bat, if you're an artist releasing your debut album, there's going to be two types of people who listen to it. People who already knew about you from previous projects and singles, and people who are just now finding out about you as a result of releasing said debut. When it comes to the specific type of music an artist releases, they have to do a good job at introducing new fans to their current sound, while also reminding old fans why they listened to their music in the first place, as well as showing how their sound has evolved over time. To me, Jockstrap's debut album, I Love You Jennifer B, is a prime example of how you do this and do it well. Jennifer B was a slight departure from EPs such as Wicked City and Love is the Key to the City, which you can clearly see in the way that the word city is absent from the album's title. Wow. But sonically, Jennifer B still sounds like Jockstrap while incorporating new ideas into the mix, as well as refining the sound of those EPs into something wholly recognizable and unique. They really achieved the best of both worlds here, and I can't wait to hear whatever they put out next, which is exactly what a debut album is supposed to accomplish. Memorable aesthetics and branding is another key part to this, and to me, there is no better debut album that exemplifies this than Pang by Caroline Polachek. Björk. Part of the reason why Caroline is one of my all-time favorite musicians is the way that she incorporates her visual aesthetic into her music. Each song from the album has an individual single cover that tells a story and gives the viewer an idea of what to expect when they become a listener. Desire did this as well, but because Pang was her debut as a soloist, it was super important for Caroline to nail this, and nail it she did. The last point I want to bring up here is how, more so than albums that will eventually succeed it, a debut will work more often than not when it's a cohesive body of work with a point of view. If you're introducing yourself to the world as an artist, it's important to let people know what you think and what you stand for. And that can often be done by incorporating overarching themes into a body of work such as a debut album. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of the music, I think Ethel Cain did a fantastic job of this on her debut album Preacher's Daughter. That album gave the listener a clear sense of who Ethel is as a musician by telling a story through the music and having each song be an integral part of that story. And obviously not every single debut album has to be a concept album with a clearly defined narrative like that one is. What I'm getting at is that artists with a point of view that include overarching themes in their debut body of work are more likely to be remembered and gain a steady fanbase. Even if your next move move is to directly alienate that fan base by creating an hour-and-a-half-long drone EP. Love her. Okay, but actually, that EP is really fucking good. I'm kind of turning into a Caniac now. So with all that being said, I was reminded of why nailing a debut album is so important when I tuned into the debut album of French musician oklou, titled Choke Enough. After some repeated listens, I can confidently say that this is one of the best debuts I've heard in a long time, probably since I Love You Jennifer B. And the reason for that is that it succeeds at every single one of these points I just described. Let's discuss why that is. Starting with an introduction, some knew of oklou through her association with London-based independent record label Nuxie, founded by Bjork collaborator and Lil Nas X plagiarism victim Sega Bodega. Other artists previously signed to the label include Shy Girl, Cuckoo Chloe, and Brooke Candy, and to me it was basically like PC music on dark mode. Every signee had a similarly grimy yet sleek and modern aesthetic to their music, and though I'm fairly sure it's defunct at this point, if you're into that other defunct independent record label based out of London, you've probably heard of them. Though Nuxie was some people's jumping off point with oklou, most people recognize her from her 2020 mixtape Galore, which is one of my favorite projects of all time. Talk about aesthetic, dude. This mixtape is easily one of the best examples of an artist blending their visual aesthetic with their music. If you've listened to Galore, you most likely know what I'm talking about. It captures that twilighty, autumnal, dystopian adjacent, recorded in the Western European countryside vibe so perfectly. There were also some overarching themes here having to do with technology and love in the digital age. Songs like the title track and Girl on My Throne are key examples of that. I think Galore did a fantastic job of setting the stage for what we would later receive on Choke Enough. Going back to my point about aesthetics from earlier, this album takes aesthetic cues from Galore and updates them to make sense in a clearly defined new era. One example of this is the use of color in the visuals. Galore was very desaturated visually. If there was any color, it would be subtle hints of red and orange, but for the most part these visuals were made up of grays and browns to go with the project's earthy feel. On Choke Enough, the saturation hasn't been turned up a ton, but the darker grays and browns have been replaced by whites and pale blues. Looking at the album cover, as well as the single arts and the music videos, it's pretty obvious that blue was the game plan this time, and it feels like a very conscious decision to move in the opposite direction color scheme-wise. This ties into the mood on most of the tracks as well. Galore was mostly populated with quieter and low-key tracks, with the exception of songs like Girl on My Throne and God's Chariots. But Choke Enough has a lot more oomph when it comes to the beats and the tempo on most of these songs. Because of this, choosing a lighter color palette to represent lighter sounding music makes complete and total sense. Synesthesia tease, I feel like Lord right now. But speaking of the music itself, Choke Enough also does a fantastic job of telling its audience exactly what type of music oklou makes and is known for. The album is nowhere near a departure from Galore, but it does sound uniquely identifiable because of both the music sounding lighter and the production being a lot more fleshed out. Choke Enough is primarily produced by KCMQ, who if you didn't know is to oklou who A.G. Cook is to Charlie XCX. He produces a good majority of her music. But along with him, the album has producer credits from people such as A.G. Cook, oh would you look at that, and the notably huge Danielle Harrell, and they all do a wonderful job of showcasing oklou's signature hushed, low-key, and very French vocal delivery, while also allowing her to experiment with punchier and dancier beats. The A.G. Cook produced ICT is where this is showcased best. When the song reaches its peak, it's easily the most energetic an oklou song has ever sounded. And songs like Harvest Sky and the title track are examples of oklou branching out into genres such as Eurodance and techno while still maintaining her authenticity. It doesn't sound like she's trying on these different genre hats just for the sake of it. She's taking different genres and making them work with her unique sound. So for people who are just now tuning into oklou, this album is a perfect introduction to who she is as an artist. And for returning fans, it's a perfect showcase of how her sound has evolved since Galore. In this way, she's done everything right on this album. And when it comes to being a cohesive body of work with a point of view, I absolutely think Choke Enough delivers here. The natural and autumnal theming of Galore is still very present. Songs like Harvest Sky and Closer Bladebird are some good examples of this. The themes of love in the digital age aren't quite as relevant as they were on Galore, but they've been replaced by a more fairy garden, fantastical, supernatural mood that's most apparent on songs like Thank You for Recording and Take Me by the Hand. Bladebird too, honestly, that song is the best of both thematic worlds. I keep thinking about it playing in the movie Crossroads, if that makes any sense. Though one overarching theme obviously stands out to me here, and that's the concept of forces and how they guide everyday living in subconscious ways. There's a lot of possible interpretations here. Some people on Genius think it's a capitalism critique, but honestly, I don't really see it. To me, these forces in everything, or forces I can't see, speak louder than me. Read as a way to showcase oklou's introspection and how she's come to peace with herself by accepting that there are parts of life you can't really change, you just have to adapt to them. The title track on here is where this really shines. It's clearly a reflective track based on oklou realizing where she is in life, maybe as a musician or just as a person. The idea of choking up can read as stumbling before the possibility of greatness or becoming so emotional that you're on the verge of tears. And I think both lend themselves to this idea of existing in the present moment and accepting what you can't change. Obvious, there I said it, is another example of this theme, in that it's the precise moment of realization where you think, God, why didn't I see this before when it's right in front of my face? So obvious. What it is exactly is kept vague, but I think that's for the best so the song can appeal to a wider audience. Add on an interlude with a title that further cements this idea, and there you have it, an album with a point of view that's detailed through its overarching themes. So to recap, Choke Enough by oklou references the artist's previous work while expounding upon it to welcome both new and returning listeners. listeners. It continues an aesthetic trend and fits into the artist's existing vision while also revamping it, creating something familiar yet different, and it has a point of view referenced across multiple tracks, making the body of work cohesive. That means Choke Enough 100% delivers on all three tenets of good debut albumage, and honestly, you could not ask for a better debut from an artist. If you haven't tuned into Choke Enough, or oklou in general, I'd highly suggest you do so now. It really is the perfect time. I have never been prouder to consider myself an oklou superfan. A stan, if you will. And oklou, if you're watching this, I just want to say thank you so much for an absolutely fantastic album. You really did that, queen. That's all from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
So obvious.